Hi, everyone. I want to take you through FairShare, which is this project I've been working on for the last couple of years. It draws a lot of ideas from Second Life because Second Life's virtual currency was different and interesting in a number of ways. And so I want to give a try here at taking you through what we're doing with FairShare. So, yeah, like it says here, the basic idea is to print your own money. What would it be like to be able to print your own money rather than getting it from somebody else? And is that possible? The reason that I want to work on this and the reason that we're designing FairShare is looking at a really big problem that is making the world worse and worse, causing a lot of division and conflict, and is not getting any better yet as a result of innovations like cryptocurrencies. And the basic problem is wealth inequality. We are seeing, and I'm going to go into like why this is, that wealth inequality is rising no matter what, across across everywhere, and in particular, everywhere where there's a free market. There's basically this problem of wealth inequality rising, and the combination of that and the lack of a safety net around social programs creates all this tension and ultimately risks the emergence of more and more authoritarian regimes where people are basically giving up on democracy, giving up on civil society, and instead trusting in a potentially harmful ruler to make things right for them, and it's not going to make things right. Also, AI, which we're all talking about right now, has as one of its components the ability to automate a lot of jobs. And while that may make sense 100 years down the road, it only makes things worse in the short term. So job automation from AI will worsen wealth inequality. And what I'm going to explain is FairShare reduces this risk, attacks this problem in an unusual way, which is by changing at the very bottom how money works. To think about this, just consider the following question. If you were like on Elon's rocket ship and you were taking, say, a year-long ride to Mars with 10,000 other people, and you were all planning to spread out and live on Mars and create cities and, ultimately have kids and stay there for the rest of your lives, uh, how would you want money to work if you were all on the spaceship together? What would you be able to agree on, and what would the experiment of deciding how money might work on Mars kind of lead you to? And it's something to keep in mind here because it relates so importantly to what we're trying to do with FairShare. Like, how do you make money work at all in a way that, say, more than half of the people on the spaceship would vote for? How would you do it? I think as you got into thinking about it, you'd realize something, which is money has a lot of different reasons to exist, right? Sometimes people talk about things like storing value with money, or uh, uh, having a unit of measure. If I have more money than you, it means I'm more important than you, or something like that. But the most vital function of money isn't that. It's trade. It's enabling us to share with strangers. And that's something to stop and kind of ponder for a moment. Over all of time, we've wanted different ways to exchange things with people we don't know very well. When we know people really well, we can exchange goods and services with them without any need for money at all. It's just based on trust, or unconditional love in the case of your nearest family. But with your close friends, for example, you just take care of each other by reciprocating ways of helping each other. One of you might drive to work one day, the other one might buy each other lunch the next day. And so this idea of reciprocity is easy amongst friends, but it's much harder to do with strangers that you're never going to see again. And so the vital reason that money exists, the purpose of money that we're working on with FairShare, and in my opinion, the only purpose anybody should care about, is this idea of enabling sharing, particularly with strangers. So to use money to enable trade is to use it as a medium of exchange, to use it as a way of swapping things with other people. And the important point, the kind of hopefully the beginning of a sort of a red pill moment here, is if what you're trying to do is trade with your neighbors, why would you need to go out and earn the medium of exchange you're going to use to trade things you already have with them? This is a really important moment to pause and think about that. Why would you go buy or borrow the very money that you need to exchange eggs with your neighbor when you already have those things? Why would you need to go buy the money that you need to use to do that? And of course, the answer is you don't. And this is what we're technically enabling with FairShare. So if a group of people trust each other well enough to create and be willing to exchange things with each other in their own currency, they can basically remove this requirement that I just said of needing to go get the money from somewhere else that you need to use to trade. And by the way, that's the same whether it's $100 bills or Bitcoins. It doesn't matter. You shouldn't have to go out and get those bills or Bitcoins to enable trade with a community. So this is what we're going to talk about. And in fact, let's more generally just talk about how do we turn trust into money. So what I'm saying is by mutual trust amongst a group of people, you can basically turn it into money and save yourself the money that you would have needed to otherwise needed to go out and borrow. So imagine it starts with two people that want to trade with each other and they don't have any money to do that. Now, if they don't trust each other, and by the way, this is kind of the backbone that we've experimented with crypto, which there's some value in that. But the summary idea of crypto, right, is trust no one. It came out of a premise, which was a good experiment of saying, can we build a form of money where you trust no one? So if Alice and Bob don't trust each other at all, then the only thing they can do is fall back to a form of money that they both know with certainty has value. And that would be something like pieces of gold or Bitcoins or US dollars. But the problem with that is, as I said before, then they have to go out and buy with their own labor or maybe borrow and then pay interest that money that they needed to trade with each other when they already were ready to trade with each other. They just shouldn't have needed to do any work. And so the regular way has you buying the money or working for it. And then also, by the way, paying fees on transactions. Imagine for a minute if you had a small community of friends that you wanted to buy and sell things from each other, and you used PayPal, for example. Over time, when you're doing those transactions, the money that you're handing back and forth in the system has fees attached to it. So once in a while, you pay that 2.5% credit card fee if you're a merchant on accepting money. And so what that does is it slowly takes away, those fees eat up all the money that you were using. So Alice and Bob, even if they did somehow get themselves a stack of bills or bank cards, eventually lose that money to fees and then have to go do more work for more money. And so it's an ongoing problem, not just an initial one. So instead of going and working for the money, Alice and Bob can do something different. If they trust each other, what they can do instead is create their own currency by writing IOUs to each other. So Alice comes to me and she says, I need some entrepreneurial startup advice, and I hang out with her for a couple hours and give her the advice. She writes me an IOU that says, I owe, this is $200 that I owe to Philip for his advice. I can now come back to her the next day and I can buy I can have her repair my car, and I can give that IOU that she gave me the day before right back to her. So we can trade these IOUs back and forth in a community, and we don't need money. We don't need to go out and get dollars, and we don't pay any fees. We're trading back and forth the very IOUs that we created ourselves. Now, how do we expand that? Well, sure. I mean, we can let other people into our little trading group. And by the way, for those that are interested in the study of currency, this experiment has been done a lot around the world, and it's worked just fine all over the place. You can look up many, many different examples of people doing this. But we can basically expand the group of people that are exchanging IOUs with each other as a means of expanding our economy. And of course, money is as valuable as the goods and services it can buy. So the more people we add to the mix, the more value our made up currency here has, and so on. And so this is a very sensible way that a group of people, or say a village, can create a money together. So now let's consider the case where you've got, say, two little villages of people that are exchanging IOUs with each other. Well, when they travel to each other's village, can they buy stuff from the other village? Well, sure. We can do that a third way, which is we can say, well, they've each got this IOU currency, currency A and currency B that they've created by exchanging, swapping these IOU slips with each other. But basically, if there's a good number of people in each group doing that, we can also exchange our own locally created currency that we built, as I just described. We can exchange it at whatever price people are willing to pay back to a reserve currency like dollars or bitcoins or even something like airline loyalty points. It really doesn't matter. Any currency that both villages in this case believe has value will work fine as a swap between them. So basically, and this here gets into a little bit of you have to do this by doing some good software work to make this easy. But the theoretical idea here is people can create their own currencies, but then when they travel to each other's locales and they want to buy something from the other group, they can just quickly swap their own currency back to, say gold or dollars, and then swap that back to the local currency. And by the way, the demand for that local currency when I travel there is precisely what gives it its value. That I want something from that other group of people that I'm willing to pay for is what basically sets their currency as having a non-zero value in a reserve currency. A little bit of a complicated idea, but we're going to come back, talk about that more. So what I just described is this basic idea. If people trust each other as a group, they can print their own money. Then if they want to swap between groups, they can use a reserve currency to do that. So how do we do this at scale? How do we deploy this at scale? What are the problems we're going to run into? Well, there's several big problems, and here they are. The first one is even if people mint their own currency, and I'm going to talk about this next, there is a growing inequality problem that happens in all free market economies. And so we have to address that somehow because it's part of what's gotten us to the really bad spot that we're in right now with inequality in real economies. The second one is if we're doing this swapping IOUs thing, we need to kind of have a mechanism that keeps the borrowing reasonably fair, even when it's a large enough group that people don't know each other well. So in other words, Philip shouldn't be able to write IOUs for a total of $1 million if Alice is only able to write IOUs for a few $1,000s, and unless Philip is, I guess, regarded by the group as being that much more valuable than Alice. And so we have to have a way to keep the borrowing fair when people are writing these IOUs and they don't know each other too well. The third thing is, as I mentioned before, each community has to stabilize its exchange rate because and this is much like a country in the real world with a fiat currency, the exchange rate has to be stabilized so that you're able to buy goods and services from other groups when you need to. So there has to be a mechanism for that. And then fourth, and this is probably almost a cause for concern with some of the historic local currencies that have been tried. You want to make sure the overall system feels great to use for early adopters. It shouldn't feel harder to use than, say, dollars. It should feel better than dollars to use right from the start. So let's talk about some of that. So the first one is managing growing inequality. And this, again, is a kind of a red pill moment. And so I want to dwell on it for a second. There's a very unusual thing about free markets, which is despite all the wonderful things that they do and their very necessity for civil society, free markets have an unfortunate property, a kind of an inconvenient truth, to borrow from Al Gore here. They always increase inequality, even amongst people that are otherwise identical. So free market trading, people just buying and selling things from each other, even under computer simulated conditions where those people are identical to each other. They have no differences in their innate value to each other. What happens is, in a free market, money gradually shifts from the poorer people to the richer people, and that progress is steady and unstoppable until, if you have a perfectly free market with no taxes, for example, and you just let people trade, and the people are identical, you will eventually end up with a situation where one person has literally all the money. And this is not due to people exploiting each other. It's due to an unusual property of money at its lowest layer. It's kind of layer zero, if you will. There's a bug in money, which has to do with the slight advantage that a person with more money than a person with less money has in even the simplest open market trade. This has been written about in Scientific American. There's a link there. You can see there's a simulation on the right. This is the one that I did that started FairShare, where I looked at how inequality changed over time under idealized free market conditions where nobody's any different than the other. Our website, fairshare.social, has this simulation on it, and you can go there and actually start the clock from zero and watch inequality grow under these free market conditions with identical participants. It's been written about in Scientific American, and the graph on the left, sadly, is the inequality index in the United States over a long time, from the end of from World War II to now. And what you can see is that from about 1970 to now, that inequality has just unfortunately grown steadily. And the point there is, in a society where everybody's values don't change, you wouldn't expect the inequality to grow, and yet it's growing. And what I'm saying is the reason that it's growing more than anything else is because of this unfortunate property of free market trading. So let's talk about how we fix that. So believe it or not, and this is, maybe sounds a little funny if you're, say, a very libertarian crypto enthusiast. In healthy economies, that is, economies where people's well-being is high, where people say, I'm happy with this place, I'm not trying to leave, I don't want to overthrow the government. In healthy economies, what actually happens is free markets do this thing I just described, which is they move money from poorer to richer people. And in different ways, but in all healthy economies, some process then moves excess money back from richer to poorer people. So there's a sort of a recirculation pump that happens in a healthy economy. By the way, that's why we call it currency, because it stands for current, like the current of a river. There's a current that flows, moving money gradually in the free market from poorer people to richer people, but you need a separate pump that moves money back from richer to poorer people. So governments do this typically with taxes, income taxes, sales taxes, different programs that essentially do that just enough to keep the balance right so that the free markets are balanced by some kind of taxes. Now, in a distributed system, such as a cryptocurrency, you don't have necessarily the ability to have taxes and welfare programs and things like that. And actually, net, of course, that's a good thing, because we get a chance to start all over again and figure out a way to put something in there. But the point I'm trying to make is you have to have something that redistributes. If you have a free market, or I should say, if you intend to have a free market, which we absolutely should, you need a compensatory mechanism that moves money back as the free markets aggregate it toward the wealthier. The way that FairShare does this is, instead of using some complicated bureaucracy and government programs, it just has one thing that's essentially kind of built in at the lowest level layer of the system, in the way that, say, fees are built into blockchains today. What FairShare uses is a single tax that's a percentage on every transaction, every transfer. So if you give money to your kids for their allowance, or if you buy eggs, or if you buy a car, or if you buy a house, it doesn't matter. There's a tax which is built into the code that can't be avoided. And that tax is then collected and then redistributed equally to everybody using that currency as a dividend. And of course, as a side effect, that creates a kind of basic income. So there's a single tax that's a percentage, that's automated in the system, and it's given back to everybody equally. And that's how we stall this problem of inequality running away, all else being equal. So you want distribution of wealth in a society to be unequal, but you want it to be unequal according to value contribution. You want it to be unequal because people have done more valuable work for each other. You don't want it to be unequal just because of this math problem that I talked about before. So that's what we're fixing. We're not removing the idea of the free market. We're adding a decentralized mechanism to compensate for the free market. This idea of a dividend that's also a basic income also replaces the need to borrow when you initially issue those IOUs. If there is a basic income, and I'm going to get to how this actually works kind of from day zero. If there's a basic income, it kind of is the same as a borrowing limit for everybody. And if you're going to have a high scale system, you need to have some fairness where everybody kind of has the same access to capital in the system. And that's exactly what a dividend based basic income does. It gives everybody the same kind of line of credit rather than having to trust that, hey, Philip's only going to write so many dollars in IOUs. The next thing, and it relates to this, how does the money pump kind of get started on day one, is that the community has an ability to regulate through voting. The community regulates through voting a couple of key numbers in the system, and this has the effect also of stabilizing the exchange rate. The first thing is we actually, with FairShare, give the community the ability to directly vote all the time. So a community is the users of a particular currency. And as I'm going to get to, we actually have multiple currencies in this system, not just one single currency. So each different currency in its community votes continuously on two knobs, as I show them here, which is, I think, the best way to think about them. The first knob is, what's that tax rate? That's the one on the right. What's the tax rate that everybody pays on every transaction that's going to kind of get distributed back to everybody? The second knob is, how many dollars a day do we each want to get printed for ourselves as this basic income? Now, why are these knobs not the same number? Because, as I said earlier, the most simplistic way to look at it is that there's a tax that just gets given out equally to everybody. Well, how do you get started? You need some money to prime the pump so that you can then have transactions and taxes that are dividended back. The way, and the other thing is, as a community grows or shrinks, or its productivity grows, or its politics changes, or whatever, you often have situations where you actually want the community to be able to control the amount of money in circulation, because the amount of money in circulation sets the exchange rate of a currency. If you put more money in circulation, as we know in the real world from the disasters we've seen in the real world with real currencies, if you print too much of the currency, then its price starts to drop against other currencies. And so you want to give a community an ability to control their own money that they're printing. And this is how we do it with FairShare. You vote continuously on the tax and on a printing rate, basically. And if you set those knobs right during times, say, when the community is stable and nothing is changing, as I described earlier, the tax will basically equal the amount of the income. And by the way, we've tested this with real world numbers. So if you took a typical US city and you had them use this currency that I'm describing, and they levied a sales tax-ish rate, like say 7.5% or 8%, and then dividended it back to everybody in the community, guess what the monthly income from the dividend for each person in the community would be? It would be something like $1,000 based on the rate at which people buy and sell things in a typical US city. So the typical US community, for example, or European community, would be able to generate a significant income funded by these transactions for every member of their population. So this is an example of a self-funding system. So this is a kind of, for example, basic income that does not require subsidies. It is entirely self-funded by the system that I'm describing here. So let's summarize what we've got here. How does FairShare work? Well, first, people create groups with other people they trust. The way this is going to work is it's completely ad hoc. If you want to create a collegiate alumni group, you could do that in FairShare. If you want to create a neighborhood group that ranges out a few blocks from somebody's address, you could do that too. People can create groups in any way they care to. Each one of these groups gets a currency, and it has this basic income that's funded by the tax, as I discussed. And that currency can immediately be used to buy goods and services from each other in that community. Second, the members of the community, not the government, not some faraway agency, but the community members themselves, are continuously voting on their smartphones on the tax and the income or the printing rate of the currency able to stabilize the amount of currency in circulation, decide what the appropriate income rates and taxes are for their community, which of course different communities may have different opinions about what rates they want, and then finally to control their exchange rate as need be, so that when they travel and you want to buy something from another group, the exchange rate for their own currency is where they want it to be. And then finally, when groups need to engage with other groups, they basically can take this local currency that they've printed and just instantly exchange it to a reserve currency. So, for example, FairShare might use the Bitcoin Lightning Network to do that. So you'd have your local currency, you go to buy a drink in a bar where they accept a different local currency, and you instantly, right at the moment where you pay for your drink, you swap your local currency for, say, Bitcoin on the Lightning Network, and then swap back to the currency of the bartender so that you can pay for your drink. And that's basically it. That's the whole idea of FairShare. And I believe that this is a simple, buildable, scalable way to provide a different kind of digital currency and provide a tool for communities to govern themselves by governing their own currency, providing themselves with an agreed upon source of income that is funded entirely by the local group. And going back to the very beginning, it's providing a group of people with a mechanism where they can use trust in each other to print their own currency, which then saves them all that money that they would have and labor that they would have had to spend acquiring the currency in some other way. And FairShare as a local currency can work together with, for example, cryptocurrencies, using them as the means to exchange with other groups. And so this whole thing comes together and builds on some of the distributed technology that we've created, in the last decade or so. And as I touched on earlier, FairShare also draws a lot of ideas from the work that we had to do in creating Second Life with its own currency, its own basic income, its own reserve strategy. And so my goal as an entrepreneur is to apply some of those learnings to a new form of currency that can be directly and immediately of positive value to people around the world. I'm Philip Rosedale. Thank you for listening. I'm the founder of Second Life, and this is my new project, FairShare. And if you'd like to learn more about FairShare, you can visit our website at fairshare.social. Thanks so much.